first heard of the castle of White Otter Lake through Pete, who was living nearby in Atikokan at the time. Is this place fairly well known locally?
Yeah, I would say if you live near Atikokan, Thunder Bay, any of that kind of area, you probably know about the White Otter Castle. It's the kind of place you might grab your family, hitch the boat up to the trailer, and head out to the lake for the weekend, have a picnic, maybe carve your initials into the wood of the castle. A lot of people like to do that.
Yeah, please don't, though.
But it is, it's something that's well known locally, but maybe not so well known outside of that little world.
So I don't want to make this out to be more than it was. Like Pete was saying, if you had a cottage on a surrounding lake or, live close by and had a boat, it wouldn't be as hard to get to. But for some out-of-towners like us, it was quite the adventure.
Yeah, for real.
So we rented a boat at Brown's Clearwater West Lodge, which is a camping resort on the southwest lake below White Otter Lake. Leaving the lodge, we boated up to the northern part of the lake where we got a, luxurious portage from Clearwater West Lake into White Otter Lake. From there, it was navigating through the waterway past islands and passages into other parts of the lake. Now, we weren't exactly in the middle of nowhere, but we're maybe on the edge of nowhere. There's no cell signal or anything here, so we were using the map provided by the lodge. Another thing to keep in mind is that this isn't a quick rip across the lake. It's roughly 26 or so kilometers through the lake in a fishing boat. So it took a few hours to get from the lodge to the castle. But eventually we started to see its red roof through the trees and we knew we had arrived.
Now the story of the White Otter Castle and its builder, James Alexander McOuat, is a sad and interesting story. McOuat's history is a bit hazy and maybe a bit more folklore than fact. From what we can tell, the basic story is that when he was younger, he built up a pretty successful farming business. He owned 3 farms. But for whatever reason, he decided to move on and try something new, and he put all of his savings into prospecting for gold in northern Ontario. He was not as successful with this endeavor, and he never found his bonanza out there in the wilds. With not much to show for his prospecting days, he reinvented himself again, building a small shack on White Otter Lake and becoming a trapper. It was a difficult lifestyle, and trips to the nearest town for supplies took a full day each way by canoe and portage. But during this time, McOuat began building his legacy.
It was 1903, and at the age of 51, Jimmy, as he was known, began building his massive cabin. He cut down the Norway pines, cleaned them, dragged them to the site, prepared them, and lifted them into place all by himself. Over the years, his castle started to take form. Keep in mind, at this point, any supplies and parts he needed, if he couldn't make them himself, he was canoeing and carrying them in over that long journey from the nearby towns. And that could be 30 to 80 kilometers each way, depending on the town. In 1912, a logging company began working around the lake. At this point, Jimmy was able to use their ice road to bring in his supplies. I think this is probably when he brought in the bigger items like the wood stove and windows, but that's just speculation. I'm not really sure anyone knows. It was the boost he needed, though, and within the next 2 years, he had finished his castle.
Now, in the years since then, many people wondered what it was that inspired Jimmy to build such an extravagant home in the middle of nowhere. And this is where some of that folklore comes in. So one story is that Jimmy wanted to have a wife, and he had a friend find him a woman, and he began corresponding with her. But when she learned that he didn't have a proper house for her, she refused to come to him. He set out to build her the home that he thought she deserved. Now, in this version of the story, she never comes. Maybe because it took so long to finish, or because she never really wanted to be his wife in the first place. Now, that said, this version does have a bit of truth to it. He did ask a neighbor to find him a wife, and he was matched with a young woman named Jane Gibson. They did correspond for a while, but nothing ever came of it. However, This all happened back in his farming days, long before he began building his home on White Otter Lake.
The more popular story around the castle is that when Jimmy was just a boy, a friend of his threw either a potato or a turnip at an older man. The man believed it was Jimmy who threw the root vegetable and scolded him, saying, "You never do no good, you'll die in a shack." So when Jimmy was a bit down on his luck, living in a shack after having lost his money in prospecting, this memory was haunting him, and he couldn't let that old man be right. This gave him the drive to take on this monumental task of building the castle.
And while he did finish building his home, Jimmy did not get to enjoy it for very long. Just 4 years after completion, James McOuat got caught in his fishing net while out on the lake and drowned. His body was found the following spring by a group of forest rangers. He was laid to rest in the shadow of the castle he built.
After his death, the house was left abandoned. Bit by bit, the castle was looted by locals, taking the windows, stoves, anything useful. With nothing of value left, the house sat to rot. Here's an image of the castle dated 1917, so not long after completion. You can just make out some people on the lower left, not sure if any of them are Jimmy. Now here's a shot that isn't dated, but I imagine it's sometime later as the windows are all gone and the roof is looking pretty rough. And here is an interior picture from the late 70s. Again, really not looking good. Floorboards are half missing and beams are coming down. But thankfully, not long after this, in the mid-80s, a group formed called the Friends of White Otter Castle. They had the goal of raising funds and facilitating the restoration of this historic building.
And the Friends of White Otter Castle have succeeded. In the early 90s, a big restoration effort took place that replaced the roof and fixed up numerous structural issues. Since then, they've been busy trying to keep the place in good order, putting up informational signage and spreading awareness for this unique building. We visited in the summer of 2020, and there's been more progress since we were there. From their Facebook page, it looks like they're currently putting in windows, replacing some more logs, and working on having a sprinkler system installed to protect the building from fire.
If you'd like to visit this hidden gem in the future, or just appreciate its story, you can donate to their nonprofit to help with its restoration and upkeep. Hopefully, it will be there for visitors in another 100 years.
We did it. Well, we still have to make it home.